For nearly 4 decades, John Gottman has done something most people would call either impossible or vaguely indecent. He has put love under instruments. At the facility the press nicknamed the Love Lab, couples are wired to sensors reading blood velocity, pulse, and palm sweat, then asked to discuss a disagreement for 15 minutes while a camera watches each face. This book, written with Nan Silver, came out of that archive, and it begins with a puzzle. Miserable couples insisted sincerely that they loved each other while telling each other to shut up in front of his cameras. Working with the computer scientist Tara Madihasta, who applied hidden Markov models, the analysis used to decode languages and DNA sequences, Gottman found the shape of the trap. These couples occupy what is technically called an absorbing state of negativity. The probability of entering exceeds the probability of leaving. He calls it the Roach Motel for lovers. The poison that puts them there, he argues, is betrayal, and rarely the kind that makes headlines. The claim is deliberately strong. Betrayal lies at the heart of every failing relationship. And the antidote is one thing only, which is trust. What follows summarizes his argument. It is not a substitute for the book. Chapter 1. Assessing your trust metric. The idea arrived while Gottman was watching a crime drama. An episode of Numb Thurs had its resident genius devise a mathematical trust metric to gauge loyalty among suspected terrorists, and it occurred to him that his own data might yield a real one. He built it out of game theory, the mathematics of von Neumann and Morgenstern's theory of games and economic behavior, whose governing assumption is that rational players maximize their payoffs. He illustrates with Jenny and Al, newlyweds dividing housework, each scoring the 4 possible arrangements from 0 to 10. Jenny gains 12 points by changing Al's behavior, and Al gains 11 by changing hers, so both conclude, rationally, that the other should pick up the broom. That, Gottman says, is a precise picture of distrust. Invert it, and you have his definition. Trust is not a vague quality that grows between two people, but the specific state that exists when both are willing to change their own behavior to benefit the partner. In game-theoretic terms, this is the Nash equilibrium, except that his couples arrive there to raise each other's payoffs rather than only their own. Measurement required the archive. 5 studies, including 131 newlyweds, tracked 6 years, and 160 couples followed 20 years with Robert Levinson and Laura Carstensen. The essential instrument was humble, a video recall dial of the sort news programs give voter panels, which each partner turns while watching the recording of their own argument. Using the SPAFF coding system, rather than the couple's opinions of themselves, he sorted every behavior into 3 boxes, nasty, nice, and neutral, and looked for interdependence. From box frequency and payoffs, Gottman derived an equation predicting a couple's fate about 85% of the time, then added 2 measures. Trustworthiness quantifies willingness to sacrifice for the relationship and is not identical to trust. In counseling, he calls high trustworthiness creating the sacred, noting that sacred and sacrifice share a root. It is the most important sentence in the chapter because what his instruments detected is an old thing. A bond becomes holy precisely where you stop trading it. Chapter 2. The 3 boxes. The question is not whether couples stay in the niece box during a fight, which no one can, but whether they can enter it at all. Violet, riding beside a boyfriend whose driving frightens her, criticizes him the whole way. At the summit, she gasps at the view and teases that maybe he did drive them off a cliff. He laughs, nothing is solved, and the weekend is saved. Repairs are the life jackets of romantic partnerships, and what distinguishes happy couples is not the elegance of the repair, but its surgical timing. The joke lands exactly as the other's physiology nears overload. The neutral box holds his most surprising result. Among couples in their 40s and 60s, happy ones spent about 65% of conflict time in neutral against 47% for unhappy ones, drifting nearer 70% 12 years later. He supports this with a study by Levinson and his student Rachel Ebling, who showed therapists, researchers, and pastoral counselors the first 3 minutes of arguments from 10 real marriages and asked which had ended in divorce. The professionals did no better than a coin flip. They were watching the fireworks, the signal was in the calm, The nasty box holds the book's central mechanism, and Gottman's term for its physical dimension is flooding, a hormonal surge, raising pulse, blood pressure, and sweat output. Men flood more readily and stay aroused longer, so a husband may respond to an irritated wife as if facing a predator. Flooding makes rational thought nearly impossible, and the flooded partner either attacks or refuses to communicate, which Gottman calls stonewalling. Beneath the physiology is a deficit in attunement, and its absence follows 5 steps. It begins with the sliding door moment. Every request for connection is a bid, from "Could you get me a beer?" to "I need you," after a frightening diagnosis, and each opens a door the partner walks through or leaves shut. Step 3 is the Zeigarnik effect, from Bloomer Zeigarnik's 1922 observation that Viennese waiters carried enormous orders flawlessly and forgot them the moment they were delivered. Unfinished business is twice as memorable, so an unrepaired argument stays available for rehearsal. Step 4 is negative sentiment override, a term coined by the psychologist Robert Weiss, in which people miss roughly half their partner's positive gestures. Step 5 brings the 4 horsemen: criticism, contempt, defensiveness, stonewalling. Here Gottman corrects himself, admitting he once believed eliminating them would let love flourish on its own. Only rebuilding trust heals. What the sequence really describes is the slow substitution of suspicion for charity, and charity, once withdrawn, does not return by technique. Chapter 3. I didn't mean for it to happen. Why cheaters cheat. Gottman's most contested move comes early. People who stray are not evil, and when research examines infidelity dispassionately, the relationship itself turns out to be the cause in most cases. No repair is possible, he argues, if the cheater is treated as a monster. James is a photographer whose business has been gutted by digital cameras. His wife Marion has just become head chef at a good restaurant. When she confides her anxiety, he tells her to be more positive, the advice he gives himself, and she hears dismissal and says nothing. He, meanwhile, begins silently comparing her with an old girlfriend who admired him, and then meets a woman named June at a coffee bar. 6 months pass before anything physical happens, but the betrayal, Gottman insists, began with that first favorable comparison. That is the mechanism the chapter names, the negative comp. The untrustworthy partner does not merely turn away, he simultaneously measures the partner against someone else, real or imagined, and the partner loses. Gottman credits the late research psychologist Carol Rusbolt, whose 3 decades of work found that commitment grows as partners increasingly compare their relationship favorably to alternatives. He also reports a finding that complicates any determinism. Of couples locked in miserable, endless battle, about 30% remain trustworthy. The trust metric has collapsed. They are trapped in a zero-sum game, and yet they still sacrifice for the relationship. In some cases, he notes, this is because their faith commits them to the sanctity of the family. He records it almost in passing, and it deserves more weight than he gives it. 30% of couples in identical misery do not betray each other, and what holds them is not a skill. The descent itself he maps through the late psychologist Shirley Glass, whose Not Just Friends gave couples the image of walls and windows. Healthy partners keep a window open between them and a wall around the pair, and betrayal reverses the two. The troubled partner confides in the newcomer, walls off the spouse, and rewrites the marriage's history under negative sentiment override until the innocent partner is the one who looks selfish. Gottman is right that the affair is the last event rather than the first. But his framing, in which the relationship causes the betrayal, makes agency vanish exactly where it matters most. Every stage he describes is a choice, and calling a sequence of choices a cascade does not make them less chosen. Chapter 4. Men, Porn, and Sex Drives. Gottman opens with Billy Crystal's line that women need a reason to make love, and men just need a place, and concedes that research broadly supports it. He also found that nearly 70% of new parents suffer a decline in the friendship that fuels sexual love, leaving both exposed to negative comparisons. But he insists on the qualification governing the whole book. Most affairs are not about sex. They are about coping with a lonely marriage by finding someone interested in you, and that longing knows no gender. On sexual addiction, he draws on Patrick Carnes's Out of the shadows for the cycle Carnes describes: preoccupation, ritualization, compulsive behavior, and despair. On pornography, his argument is structural rather than moralizing, and it is the sharpest thing in the chapter. Masturbation to an image releases oxytocin and, in men, vasopressin, the hormones of attachment, so the user risks bonding to a fetish of impersonal sex, and habitual use then reproduces the road to betrayal he has just mapped. Drawing on Dolph Zillman and Jennings Bryant's analysis of erotica, he notes the typical script has strangers meet, have sex, and never see each other again. Jennifer Schneider's research found that in 70% of couples where one partner had a cybersex compulsion, at least one had lost interest in their shared sex life. It requires secret keeping, and the secret creates distance. It manufactures negative comps, since the bonding hormones fire while attending to someone who is not the partner. And it functions as a gateway. Gottman calls this a risk to a relationship. It is that. It is also a disordering of the very faculty by which a man is able to love anyone at all. Chapter 5. 10 Other Ways to Betray a Lover. This chapter gives the book its widest reach. Non-sexual disloyalty can be as destructive as an affair, and couples routinely fail to name it, saying instead that they have grown apart. Gottman founds all 10 on 2 building blocks: deception, meaning the refusal to reveal one's true needs in order to avoid conflict, and a longing for connection that seems unavailable at home. Before the list, he inserts a warning that should be read on its own terms. Physical and emotional abuse used to control a partner is not on it, and the book is not to be used to improve such a relationship. Conditional commitment is presence until someone better appears, and he adds that it is almost always an error to marry when you do not want to, since a marriage entered to create a bond rather than express one rarely succeeds. A non-sexual affair is the work-spouse friendship that has crossed a line, and he offers a usable rule. If your partner would be uncomfortable watching your interactions or hearing what you have confided, the closeness is dangerous. Forming a coalition against the partner most often runs between a husband and his mother, and he is unambiguous about the remedy. It is the husband's responsibility to make clear that his wife comes first, that he will not tolerate criticism of her, and that their conflicts are not to be discussed. Absenteeism or coldness is illustrated by Tina, whose husband went to a meeting the morning her father suffered a fatal heart attack. She never told him how abandoned she felt, and went cold instead, and both the absence and the coldness nearly ended the marriage. Withdrawal of sexual interest, disrespect, unfairness, selfishness, and breaking promises complete the list, and on unfairness he is emphatic. A long-term relationship should be a haven from injustice, and this is not a Pollyanna attitude, but a fundamental of love. He ends with the distinction the book needs: betrayal versus whistleblowing. Citing Alexander Hamilton on the citizen's duty to distrust government self-regulation, Gottman argues that sometimes the most loving act is to hold up a mirror, since blind acceptance is never a healthy strategy. He is describing, without naming it, the difference between sentiment and love. The one wants a partner comfortable, the other wants a partner good. Chapter 6. Trust and the Roots of Attunement. Nearly every therapist and self-help book emphasizes communication, and much of that advice is excellent. But if vocabulary were sufficient, we would have talked our way out of the divorce rate by now. The obstacle Gottman identifies is a disparity in how partners feel about feelings, especially negative ones, and the term he coined for it is meta-emotion. His understanding of adult attunement came out of earlier work on parenting. In 1985, he developed a meta-emotion interview asking parents about their own childhood experience of anger, sadness, and affection, and the answers varied enormously. Emotion-dismissing parents, the larger group, treated a child's unhappiness as something to redirect, assuming feelings are chosen. They read anger as aggression, sadness as self-pity, fear as cowardice. Emotion-coaching parents treated the same distress as an opportunity to connect and help the child understand what he was feeling. Gottman is scrupulous here. Dismissive parents are not colder or less loving, and their approach is action-oriented and encourages problem-solving. But he invokes the child psychologist Haim Ginot's principle that guidance is more effective when words of understanding precede words of advice. Attunement between adults is emotion coaching. Led by his former graduate student Dan Yoshimoto, his team interviewed 100 couples about the emotional culture they came from and found a similar proportion of coaches and dismissers as among parents. Many dismissive partners meant well. Do not be sad, look on the bright side, while communicating something else entirely. Go be unhappy somewhere else. George says his wife challenges him when he is sad rather than acknowledging it, so he has stopped sharing. Notice what Gottman has established. The capacity to love well is formed in us long before we choose a spouse, by parents who either received our sorrow or told us to put it away. A marriage does not begin at the altar. It begins 2 generations earlier. Chapter 7. Attunement Made Easy, the Art of Intimate Conversation. Gottman opens at a dinner party where 3 people talk straight past each other and reaches for Jean Piaget's phrase for what he has witnessed. Collective monologue, a term the Swiss psychologist coined for the talk of preschoolers. He reframes the whole enterprise in a sentence. Many people think good conversation means making yourself sound interesting, when it is actually about being interested in the other and listening. He proved the method on a hard case. Glenn, a middle-aged engineer who prided himself on having no needs, and told Gottman that people who need people are always disappointed. 4 skills salvaged those relationships. The first is putting feelings into words, and Gottman recommends what the psychologist and philosopher Eugene Gendlin calls focusing. Trying on candidate words while monitoring the body, waiting for the moment something relaxes. The second is asking open-ended questions. What was it like at work today, rather than did you have a good day? The third is following up with statements that deepen connection, reflecting back what you heard in your own words. The fourth is compassion and empathy, being on your partner's team, whether the issue is trivial or grave, and stifling the urge to correct the emotion. Gottman's rule is stricter than most. Do not offer advice at all unless asked, because understanding must precede it. There is a quiet reversal here worth naming. The skill being taught is not self-expression, but self-forgetting. The deliberate setting aside of one's own opinion in order to receive another person. It is presented as a communication technique. It is in fact an ascetic practice. Chapter 8. Turning toward each other. Asked what couples fight about most, Gottman answers that they fight about nothing, and offers an argument over a remote control that within 4 exchanges has become an argument about tone. The statistic that follows is among the most striking in the book. Couples still married at the 6-year follow-up had turned toward each other 86% of the time during their stay in the Love Lab apartment, and those who split had done so only 33% of the time. There is one exception to the rule that damage accumulates gradually. Gottman describes what his colleague Susan Johnson calls an attachment injury, a single wounding event that destroys the implicit contract to be there for each other. When the person entrusted with your deepest vulnerability is unavailable at the moment of deepest need, the result is anger, panic, and intense loneliness, and the memory stays active. Gottman quotes Faulkner, "The past is never dead, it is not even past." Most turning away is smaller, and he supplies a ladder for it, ranking minor bids by how often they were made and how often they succeeded, from noticing a passing remark up to joining a partner in learning something new. Turning toward does not mean agreeing to learn French, it means responding in a way that shows you are there. The second half catalogues repairs, drawn from work by his former students Janice Driver and Amber Tabares, who found that repairs appealing to emotion work considerably better than those appealing to reason. A tiny transcript shows how little it can take. Darius, distressed that her partner Reba will not help decide how to handle a family visit, says the refusal makes it seem the matter is unimportant to her, and Reba says, "Yes, I do understand," at which Darius's heart rate and blood pressure return to baseline. Gottman's honesty is worth marking. He concludes by admitting repairs will not solve a couple's problems, because you will miss an enormous number of each other's bids no matter how hard you try. The remedy for a life full of small failures is not fewer failures. It is a reliable practice of return. Chapter 9. Working through your messes, big and small. Gottman begins with arithmetic that reframes the problem. If both are available 30% of the time and independently, the odds of simultaneous availability are about 9%. meaning some 91% of the time the ground is ripe for miscommunication. His central intervention is the weekly State of the Union meeting, structured by the Gottman-Rappaport blueprint for constructive conflict. He takes it from Anatole Rappaport, a game theorist whose aim was not victory but the reduction of nuclear confrontation, and who therefore studied how to increase cooperation between adversaries. Rappaport's principle is the load-bearing wall of the chapter. Do not attempt to persuade, problem-solve, or compromise until you can state the other side's position to their satisfaction. Between partners, this means you do not negotiate until each can say, "Yes, that is exactly my position and what I am feeling." 6 rules spell attune. The speaker owes awareness, tolerance, and transforming criticism into wishes. Awareness means avoiding accusation. He credits Thomas Gordon with the original distinction between I and you statements. It also means sensitivity to what the UCLA psychologist Tom Bradbury called enduring vulnerabilities, the sensitivities no one escapes childhood without. Tolerance means accepting that your partner's perception has equal standing, even when you are certain you are right. He connects this to Fritz Heider's fundamental attribution error, I'm okay, you're defective, and offers a discipline. When you notice a virtue in yourself, assume your partner has it. When you notice a fault in your partner, look for it in yourself. Transforming criticism rests on his flat denial that constructive criticism exists, since unsought criticism triggers defensiveness even in the happiest couples he has recorded. The listener owes understanding, non-defensive listening, and empathy. Understanding means not judging the emotion and not solving the problem. For non-defensive listening, he offers 3 tactics used by the master attuners in his studies. Pause and breathe. Write down what your partner says along with the defensiveness you feel, and deliberately summon your love and respect. Empathy he grounds in research by Levinson and his student Anna Ruff, whose subjects showed physiological readings closest to their partners when their guesses about the partner's feelings were most accurate. Only after both feel understood does he permit negotiation, using 2 circles, a small one for core needs, a much larger one for everything flexible, before closing with the aftermath kit for old wounds. Beneath the acronyms is something far older: to state your adversary's case until he agrees you have it right, to refuse to judge another's inner life, to confess your own part rather than apportion blame. These are not negotiation tactics. They are humility, and they work because they are true. Chapter 10. Recovering from Infidelity. Gottman opens with grounds for hope, citing pilot research by Donald Borkham and Andy Christensen, finding that couples entering structured therapy after an affair begin lower in happiness than other troubled couples, but finish at the same level. The symptoms he lists after discovery: disturbed sleep, flashbacks, intrusive thoughts, emotional numbing, self-doubt, are those of post-traumatic stress, a finding he credits to Shirley Glass. The most forceful passage in the book is his list of therapeutic approaches to avoid, and the first is the advice to let bygones be bygones. Just moving on is a terrible idea, even if the affair happened 20 years ago. He compares it to finding a malignant tumor in surgery and stitching the patient closed without removing it. He illustrates with Malcolm, who has returned to Laura and 5 children after 2 ministers told them to put it behind them. Under questioning, it emerges that Malcolm grew up in a silent family where no one said they loved him, that he had come to feel like a paycheck with a pulse, and that the other woman's life was a mess, and she needed him. Both scored 100% on loneliness. Gottman's full list runs to 27 prohibited beliefs, among them that both partners are equally culpable and that shared faith alone will carry a couple through. His method is the trust revival method: atone, attune, attach. Confession must be thorough, because not knowing is worse than knowing. He cites Peggy Vaughan's survey of 1,083 people recovering from infidelity, in which couples stayed together 86% of the time when the betrayer answered questions and only 59% when he refused. Transparency and verification follow, and here he reaches for Robert Axelrod, whose work on arms reduction concluded that promises, accords, and treaties are worthless without verification that each side adheres to every agreement, beginning with the most minor. The remaining components are understanding what went wrong, explaining why the betrayer wants to return, exacting a high cost for any future betrayal, and beginning to forgive. On cost, Gottman departs from the family therapist Salvador Minuchin's confidence in the betrayer's sense of moral responsibility, citing Vincent Buskins' study of Orthodox Jewish diamond merchants who exchange million-dollar stones on a handshake because the community shuns anyone who breaks the code. Two things here belong together. Gottman is right that the merchant's handshake works because betrayal costs everything, and right that verification is not an insult to trust, but it's scaffolding. A community that will not punish disloyalty cannot produce it. And he is right, against the counselors he criticizes, that the wound must be opened before it can close. Where he is wrong about them is the diagnosis. The failure of forgive and forget was never that it demanded too much repentance, but far too little. Chapter 11. Connecting through intimate sex. Gottman opens with a transcript so evasive that the subject is unidentifiable, a couple agreeing it has gotten better, that there is a long way to go, and that at least they are not like Paul and Lily. Frank conversation about desire causes many couples enormous discomfort, with shame and fear of rejection at the root of it. He then takes on a position he considers seriously mistaken. Some therapists hold that the best sex requires that partners not develop a deep bond, an idea with historical precedent in a medieval Europe that treated marriage as economic and mocked husbands, foolish enough to feel passion for their wives. His contemporary example is Esther Perel, whose Mating in Captivity argues that emotional distance is the secret to sustained desire. Gottman does not dispute that distance heightens desire for some. He disputes that it is what most couples want, and argues from data. At the third-year follow-up of his newlywed study, only 33% of couples who were now parents were satisfied with their sex lives. And these were the only couples who carved out time alone and talked about anything deeper than the diaper pail. He adds a study by the late sex therapist Bernie Zilbergeld, who compared 100 American couples over 45, expecting to find differences in technique. The overwhelming finding was the unimportance of technique, and what separated the satisfied from the unsatisfied was a closer friendship and a decision to make sex a priority. Gottman also offers definitions, synthesizing his work with rust bolts and glasses. Romance is the state that occurs when two people nurture acts and thoughts that cherish the other as unique and irreplaceable. Passion is the state arising from a strong and at times almost obsessive interest in the partner. Together, they are the opposite of impersonal sex, which in its extreme form, he notes, is what the psychiatrist Viktor Frankl deemed pornography. Erotic activity, founded not on adoration of a person, but on a specific trigger. He cites research finding that women who discussed their sexual feelings with their husbands were 5 times more likely to be very satisfied. The chapter is frank, but the argument beneath the frankness is not the one a casual reader expects. Gottman's evidence says the erotic thrives on knowledge, permanence, and self-disclosure. That desire is fed by being known rather than by remaining a stranger. He presents this as a research finding. It is also a description of what the body was made for. Chapter 12. How to know if it's time to go. Gottman confesses at the outset that the idea of a relationship reaching its expiration date is nearly antithetical to him. He considers the death of love a tragedy. But he has watched love turn to hatred and hope to bitterness. For the cases that are genuinely unclear, he offers the story of Us Switch, which measures cumulative trust or betrayal by how partners narrate their shared past. He calls it a switch rather than a dial because he almost never sees gradations. Memories are either warm or, click, bitter. Even one partner's switch being off, he says, heralds the relationship's death. He assesses it through the oral history interview, covering how the couple met, first impressions, and how the relationship changed. He explains its predictive power biologically. The brain rewrites what it stores according to present meaning, so that a wedding once remembered fondly is recalled instead as the day he never said how beautiful she looked. His colleague Kim Buellman developed a scoring system which, applied to 120 couples with preschool children, predicted breakup within 4 years with 94% accuracy. The 5 dimensions are worth naming. The fondness and admiration system shows in whether the story is told with warmth or told instead through watered-down wine and a date who drank too much. Meanness versus weeness shows in whether the couple describes acting as a unit. Gottman prints one exchange with every I and mine in bold, in which a husband explains that the disputed money is his because he earned it. A love map of the partner's inner world shows in whether memories are specific rather than generic. Glorifying your struggles versus flailing in chaos distinguishes couples who say a hardship strengthened them from those for whom things merely happened, and disappointment versus satisfaction shows in whether the relationship became what it promised. One couple, asked what advice they would give young people considering marriage, answer, wait, and just don't do it. A relationship is salvageable, Gottman notes, if not all 5 dimensions are negative, and the complete loss of a positive history takes time, so there is often still room to act. But what his instrument actually measures is gratitude, whether 2 people still receive their common life as a gift, or have come to regard it as a bad bargain. That is why the switch is so nearly irreversible. Ingratitude does not merely misread the past, it remakes it. Chapter 13, Learning to Trust Again, a life-saving skill. The chapter opens with a question that sounds like a choice between tortures. Which is worse, a miserable marriage or an isolated life? Both, he notes, are common responses to betrayal, and both are not merely unhappy but dangerous. And he means that literally. The evidence comes from further analysis of the 20-year study of older couples, where Tara Madhyastha found that a shocking number of the zero-sum husbands were dead. Their mortality over 20 years was 58% against 23% for men in cooperative marriages, and controlling for age and other health factors, their odds of dying were 11 times higher. He adds a striking experiment by James Cone, who gave women mild ankle shocks during MRI scans. When a stranger held the subject's hand, the brain's alarm centers activated fully, but when the husband held it and the woman had described her marriage as high trust, the fear response shut off almost entirely. But loneliness, Gottman argues, is worse still. He cites the classic epidemiological study of 9,000 people by Lisa Berkman and Len Syme at Berkeley, which found that close friendships and marriage granted roughly an extra decade of life, with 6-year survival probability around 80% for those with a spouse or confidant against 50% for those without, an effect the University of Chicago's John Cacioppo attributes to elevated blood pressure from arterial vasoconstriction. His answer to the risk is not caution, but discernment, and he offers 5 criteria. Honesty. Do not trust someone who lies to you, and stop manufacturing excuses for deceptions you have already seen. Transparency. A life without secrets, in which you are introduced to friends, family, and colleagues. Accountability. Proof that promises are kept, and suspicion toward anyone who answers a specific question with "just trust me." Trustworthy people, he notes, do not tell you what to think. Ethical actions. Consistent, just, and fair conduct, and proof of alliance. Evidence that this person has your back and forms no coalitions against you. That combination, an open hand and clear eyes, is not a technique to be acquired, but a character to be formed. And 4 of his 5 criteria are simply virtues under other names. Chapter 14. What is true love? Asked repeatedly to define love, Gottman gives an answer that has nothing to do with repair attempts or absorbing states. Revere each other and be grateful that you are in each other's life. The closing argument is a warning about expectations, because the greatest obstacle to love is a sense of entitlement, the conviction that one deserves the perfect relationship, which must be out there somewhere. He is blunt, it is not. He closes with 2 borrowed passages that carry more than he claims for them. From Louise Erdrich's novel Shadow Tag, he takes the observation that infatuation is partly a fever of surfaces and an absence of knowledge, that falling in love is also falling into knowledge, and that enduring love arrives when we love most of what we learn about the other and can tolerate the faults they cannot change. And he ends by paraphrasing Proverbs, that an excellent partner is a jewel more precious than rubies, and that with a love you can believe in, you will experience good and not evil all the days of your life. A scientist who spent 40 years wiring couples to sensors finishes his book by calling love the most sacred experience we can have, and reaches for scripture to say why. He does not appear to notice that he has arrived somewhere his instruments could not have taken him. Closing. What the reader carries away is a mechanism, and a genuinely valuable one. Gottman has traced a specific chain. The missed bid, the unrepaired incident, the memory that will not close, the sentiment that inverts, the comparison that grows into a substitute, and shown that it runs identically whether it ends in adultery or merely in two people living parallel lives under one roof. He has also done something braver. He has told couples that the advice to forgive and forget is malpractice, that verification is not the enemy of trust, and that the injured party's need for reassurance must be honored rather than pathologized. The limitation is in the vocabulary rather than the findings. Gottman built his metric on game theory, and the language of payoffs and equilibria pulls persistently against what he actually discovered. He finds that 30% of miserable couples remain faithful anyway, some because their faith holds the family sacred and does not ask what that means for a theory in which the relationship causes the betrayal. He proves that being known is what sustains desire, that gratitude preserves a shared history, that promises require verification and betrayal requires cost, and that isolation kills. Every one of these is true, and none is a discovery about payoffs. They are descriptions of persons made for communion who come apart in its absence. And the reason a marriage cannot be saved by technique alone is that a covenant is not a contract with better instrumentation. Read this book for the mechanism, which is excellent, and for the practical chapters, which will help almost any couple. Then notice the words Gottman reaches for when the scientific vocabulary runs out. Sacred, sacrifice, reverence, gratitude, a jewel more precious than rubies. The instruments were pointed at something older than the instruments. This book is well worth reading in full.